You made it. You did it. You got to the third video. I knew you could do it. In this installment, we're talking about lighting and cameras. This is really like the juice here. This is the juicy, really super interesting stuff where if you have a background in photography or a video, you're just gonna feel right at home at this part, and it's really just, it's gonna be great. You're gonna love it so much. If you missed the first part of the series, the first part is about the real basics of using Blender. So if you already know those real basics of moving stuff around and making objects, then here you are. If you don't know the basics already, then I suggest you head back to the previous video because it's gonna be kind of confusing if you don't have those basics set out already. Otherwise, if you already know how to move things around and kind of work around in Blender, then we can jump right in. Where we left off in our last video, we have our object and our plane as the background. So when we're talking about photorealism, there's one setting that you change that helps a whole lot, that just makes a world of difference. So we're going to go into the render properties. So within these render properties, it's this little icon that looks like the back of a camera. So the render engine right now, by default in Blender, is set to Eevee. Eevee does not look real. I think that that's because it works faster and cycles, what we're changing it to, didn't always exist. So there was a time when Eevee was like the way that you had to go. But as far as photorealism in 2022, you want to change this to cycles. And that is very, 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 very extraordinarily important, because if you want something that is going to pass for real or semi-real, you got to change it to cycles. So feature set, you don't need to change that. Device by default is set to CPU, so this is what's being used to render our final image. And you can use your CPU, which every computer has a CPU, or a GPU, which would be a graphics card. So if you have a graphics card, you can select GPU, and your final render will go faster. I think Blender itself, things will go faster if you use GPU compute. So I do have a graphics card, so I'm going to change it to GPU right here. So super, super important. If I had to name like my 3 pillars of photorealism and getting things to really look good in Blender, the main one is cycles. So super, super, super important. Do not forget that. Cycles all day long. So now we're going to get into these workspace tabs up at the top. So you'll see scripting, geometry, compositing, rendering, etc., etc. Right now we're in layout. So now we're going to get to the fun part. We're going to add our first light. So this first light, I'm going to say that this light is something like a fill light. Because I know, at a certain point you start to get into lighting theory and what you think looks good for lighting, etc., etc. But for me, you always want one strong key light source. Our eyes are used to one strong key light source. When you're outside, there's only one sun. Even when you're inside, the light from the windows is going to be stronger from one direction. Even if it's 3 windows, it's kind of acting in unison in one direction, similar to if it was one light. So you can have one light and then fill lights, etc. We'll get into the whole thing, but we're going to start off with a fill light and start to demonstrate how things work in here. So I'm going to click on this zoom thing and scroll back, zoom out, as you remember. Then I'm going to click on add. And before we were in add mesh, but if you continue going down, you'll see add light. Here are some different kinds of lights. So we have a point light, sun, spot, and area. Now, for our photographers and video people, spot is what I use as something like a studio flash head, like a ProPhoto Flash or Godox or whatever. Maybe like a Fresnel, an RE, that kind of thing. The last one is an area light. So an area light I would use more like a softbox. And personally, sun and point I don't use at all. Instead of using a sun, I would use like an HDRI, which is something that we can get into later. But as far as studio lighting, a spotlight I use as like a studio strobe flash, and area as a softbox. So I'm going to start off with area. now you'll see that it puts it in the middle, kind of underneath our object. As a side note, this little circle, the circle with like the, it gets smaller no matter how close I get, but this little circle with the white and red going around it, that's our origin point. So every time you add an object, it goes to that origin point, just as an FYI, because you might be thinking, okay, well, I just added it, where did it go? It's under there. And you'll see that the area light is added to the collection as well. So with our area light selected, we're going to drag it upwards. So we're going to press G and then Z, as you may remember. So now it's kind of up above it somewhere. And it's very small compared to this product. So I would then do S for scale and just kind of drag your mouse out to make it bigger. So now it is a big square up over top. And the square shape, I don't know. Personally, what I'm looking for is like a rectangle up over top. So if you want to scale it just for one axis, you can do S for scale, and then I'm going to do X to widen it out over that X axis. So that's our first light there. Then, if you go over to the properties, you'll see that when the light is selected, there's another tab you can click for the object data, and that object data is for the light. So by default, it starts off with a power of 10. I don't know why that is. That is way too low for every situation ever. So I'm going to start us off with 1,000. Then, this whole time we've been in our layout workspace. So you can see layout is in white and there are all these other things. What we want to go to next is our shading. So we're going to click that shading tab up at the top, and it gives us our material preview again. Now this is where it starts to get spicy. We're going to click on this little globe thing all the way to the right of our globes. And that is our rendered view. Now I wouldn't say completely photoreal, but we're getting close now. So you're seeing something that looks a little more like real life. Next, so you can see our main light source is affecting our whole scene. So over here in our collection, there are these little eyeball icons. If you click the eyeball icon for the light, it shows you what it looks like. It shows you what it looks like without that object. So without that object, it's like looking like this gray. And then press that eyeball again, and that's what it looks like with our light. So for a second, I'm just going to click that eyeball and turn it off. So you'll see that almost half of the screen is this big gray area here, which is where our node workflow is. And I know that maybe you know a node workflow from other programs, but within the context of Blender, we haven't gotten there yet. But right here where it says objects, within this kind of gray area down here, where it says object, we're going to click that drop down. We're going to change to world. And then you can kind of scroll around until these two little things are, don't scroll around too much, but if it's not quite in the window, you can scroll around until these two things are in there. So in short, these are called nodes. This is our background node. This is projecting like a flat gray light over everything. In a real studio, there is not a flat gray light that is everywhere. So we want to be able to get real convincing contrast. So we want to disconnect that for now. So this background green dot has a line that then connects to surface. So if you click the green dot next to surface, it'll let you disconnect that node, and now it's pitch black. So that's what you want. It starts off like this. You want to click the green dot next to surface, disconnect it, like drag it, disconnect it, then let go of it. It'll just turn black. Now you can go to your collection and turn the eyeball icon back on. And this is our real studio lighting, one light overhead setup. So I'm just going to zoom in and just look at it and see what it looks like right now. Honestly, not a bad start. Honestly, not a bad start at all. So yeah, just one softbox type of light up overhead. So you'll notice that you don't see an actual light. Like a softbox, you can physically see it's real, but these lights kind of just emit from nowhere, for better or worse. But you can kind of, if you click over it, you can still select it. You can see where it is and what it's doing, but it's not like a big bright thing that's coming down. You don't see the physical object. You just see the light that the object is emitting. So not a bad start. And we could do things like press G for grab and then Y for the Y axis and kind of move it forward. So this will, in real-ish time, update where the light is. So you can move it around and see like, ooh, do I like it in this spot? Do I like it in that spot? For now, I'm just going to press escape. Yeah, so another thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click on our main object. You can say our product. I'm going to press G again and then Z. And so it's moving up and down. And I'm going to try to get it to feel like it's touching the surface because mine was feeling like it was floating. So G and then Z. Yeah, so now that looks pretty close to like it's really touching. I'm going to do it one more time. Select it, G and then Z. Just use your mouse to move it down. You don't have to hold Z. Just let go of Z and it'll move it down. So that feels pretty nearly like it's touching that surface, right? Cool, cool. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another light. This time I'm going to add a spotlight. So we're going to click on Add, Light, and then Spot. So it does the same thing. It starts from our origin point, which should be underneath our set. And then you can click on the blue arrow, drag it up, click on the green arrow, move it around. So I'm going to move it to the right on the x-axis. Then another command is rotate. So take a stab at what the shortcut for rotate is. You're right, it's R. So now, with our spotlights selected, and you can see spot right here. And you know, I try to think of if I were lighting this in real life, how far away would this light be? Where exactly would it be? And this is still kind of too close for me. So I'm going to back this out on the y-axis, just grabbing and holding that arrow. And then I'm going to drag it upwards on the z-axis. That feels close-ish. So down here in the properties, you see the light bulb. We have the properties for this light. And again, it starts at a 10 watts. I don't know why, or 10 W, whatever that means. Never enough. So for this one, I'm going to add 3 zeros. I'm going to make this 10,000. And another thing you'll see here is this radius number. So this radius number, you can click in the middle of it and you can drag it back and forth if you don't want to, just like type in a number or click the arrows. And so if this were a studio strobe light, this radius size is the size of like the dome or the disc, like the size of the thing that is casting the actual light is this radius. So I bumped it up a little bit because otherwise it's like if our tube of product is this big, the light that's hitting it would not be this big. Like a real life light is somewhere around probably fist size. So I wanted that to feel bigger compared to the product. And it does make a difference. It's something that you can play around with. But as far as those little things that make it feel real, you see products that are lit with the same size light all the time. Products are not getting lit with little mini lights. So you want it to feel proportionally similar. So personally, I'm at 0.63 for the radius size. Then I'm going to press R for rotate. I'm going to press Y for the Y axis. And I'm going to point it sort of towards our object. So on that axis, it's toward our object. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the X axis, R and then X. Rotate it to where we want it, and then click to solidify that movement. So now it's kind of in front of the object, which I usually like, actually. Then over here you see blend, it's this number, and that's kind of how harsh the edge of the light is. So if we go back to our shading, we can see what our light is doing. And it automatically put us in this scene properties. So again, you can click on the bulb. So wherever you are in the properties in one workspace, it does not keep you in the same spot for another workspace. So just because you clicked on the bulb light properties object data in this workspace, if you go to shading, it might be in a different one, but you can go in here and you can click on that same thing. The same options are there, but it just may or may not actually be clicked into that spot. So we have the same controls here, and this is with blend at 0. So I'm just going to click on the middle of it and just kind of drag it around. And that's with blend at 1. This is with blend at 0, so it's kind of harsh. And this is blend at 1. So I'm going to go with 0 because I actually think it looks a little dynamic and interesting for this particular situation. And even so far, you know, I'll click on my little, click on the little magnifying glass, zoom in a little bit. So far, not bad. Again, not all the way there, but really not bad from a photorealism standpoint. And you can kind of just, you know, scroll around, middle mouse, or click around on this compassy thing and see how it looks from different angles. You can see that the gold on it is reflecting in a realistic way. Like, we're kind of in a black void, so the top of it kind of is reflecting the black and looking like nothing. But if you get to a low angle, then it starts to reflect our other lights. And if you get from a higher angle, it starts to reflect the surface down below it. So look at you. You just added some lights to a scene that you made, an object that you added in there. You basically did the whole thing. You're like a full-on 3D artist now. So this is an area light and a spotlight. Another thing that will feel familiar from like a real-life photography or video scenario, you can bounce light using whiteboards essentially. So I'm going to go to Add, Mesh, and then Plane, just like how we made our first seamless object before. And then again, that shows up underneath. I'm going to click on that red arrow and drag it over. And so it should still be there, but if for some reason your objects don't have these arrows when you select them, like this, you have to click on this move thing. That makes those arrows show up that you can grab. So I'm going to pull it up. I'm going to press S for scale and then move my mouse around to like maybe there's good. Then left click to solidify that movement. Then I'm going to press R for rotate again. Y on the Y axis. Then another thing that can be helpful is, so for this white card, I want it to be at a straight 90-degree angle. So I could try to just guess that and kind of eye it up, which it seems like I did. But you can also type in degrees. You can type in angles. So if I type in, just without clicking anything, still in this zone where I can move stuff around, haven't left clicked. If I press 45, it'll put it at a 45-degree angle. If I press 90, it'll put it at a 90-degree angle. And you can just keep typing different stuff. If I type 123, it'll put it at a 123-degree angle. So what I want is 90. That's just as a, oh, interesting, but it keeps going. Okay, so our I got lost there. R, Y, and then 90, then left click. And now we have a white card. So our default color is white. We can get into the colors of things later, but the default color is white. So now this whiteboard would be bouncing light. We're going to go back into our shading workspace and see what that looks like. So you can back up and you can see that light is hitting that, it's bouncing. And with our added bounce board in there, you can see the little eyeball next to it for plane. If you left click on that eyeball, you can see what it looks like without that fill, what it looks like with it, what it looks like without it. Now, honestly, I think it looks more dynamic without it. I think that it looks more interesting. I like how it gets darker on the left side. I think it starts to get a little too filled in with it in there. So I'm going to turn it off for now. Also, as another FYI, which will come up later, the eyeball is for the viewport and the camera is for the actual render. So the way that it is right now, where I have the eyeball turned off for the viewport, so I don't see it in here. If I go to render it, it's going to pop up. So that's just an FYI. We'll discuss it more later, but that's what that's for. So that was it. That was lighting. Now that we got all the basics covered and you're moving stuff around and lighting it all up, you got to add the camera to capture what you just lit up. So we're going to get into adding the camera and all those camera settings in the next video. Thanks for watching.